This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, hello, everyone, and welcome. It is 12 o'clock on the East Coast, and we are going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. My name is Jessica Enix, and I'm with the ASA staff, and I would like to welcome you to today's ASA webinar, Enabling Success, Creating Alignment Between Field and Office. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few points of protocol so that you get the most out of your webinar experience. In order to reduce background noise, please mute your microphones during the presentation. We also ask that you turn off cameras during the presentation so we are only seeing our presenter. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box. The chat icon is located at the top right-hand side of your screen. The presenter will address all questions as they become available or at the conclusion of the presentation. Please note that today's program is being recorded and will be available on the ASA website at the end of the day today. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Mrs. Stephane McShane. Stephane McShane is a director at Maxim Consulting Group, responsible for evaluation and implementation processes with clients. Stephane works with construction-related firms of all sizes to evaluate business practices and assist with management challenges. With a large depth of experience working in the construction industry, Stephane is keenly aware of the business and, most specifically, operational challenges that firms face. Her areas of expertise include leadership development, executive coaching, organizational assessments, strategic planning, project execution, business development, productivity improvement, and training programs. Mrs. McShane is an internationally recognized speaker, mentor, author, and teacher. Her ability to motivate, inspire, and create confidence among work groups is extremely rare and very effective. Stephane possesses the rare combination of talent from being in the field as an apprentice, electrician, foreman, then working her way through each operational chair within a successful electrical construction firm. Her ability and drive define her to be the best in class at each position held. This talent is what makes her tremendously effective at operational and organizational assessments today. She has successfully conquered every operational position from an estimating training through executive management. She has built, trained, and led her teams to become the undisputed leaders in their markets. She is able to quickly identify organizational positives and negatives and assess appropriate action steps. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Stephane McShane.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. No pressure after that bio or anything. No pressure. Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. As she mentioned, my name is Stephane McShane. I'm the director at Maxim Consulting Group. It's my pleasure to bring a program today to you that's very new to us, to Maxim, and of course to this audience. We wrote this program because frankly, there still exists a bit of a gap that exists in the collaboration, communication, cooperation that exists between the field and the office. So we wanted to go ahead and tackle this. Of course, we start this discussion with why this is important, and then we round out the discussion with how processes, defined processes, can enable the types of success that we would wish to see within our organizations. And so I see a few very familiar names. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it, and I am watching the chat box. Linda, I appreciate that. Thanks for the comment. So let's jump in. This is, frankly, this built out as a very long course. We have an hour today, so I'm going to go fairly quickly. But as always, shoot your questions into the chat box. I'll be watching that very closely throughout the program. And then always I am available after the fact to have a conversation with you if you'd like. So let's jump in and start having this conversation really quickly. I won't spend a lot of time here. Maxim's a consulting group that focuses exclusively on the construction space. All of our clients are construction associations or contractors, and all of our operations folks, the consultants at Maxim in the group itself, are all ex-operations folks from construction. So we're not, you know, from all these other industries. All of us are from the operations side of construction. My own background's in electrical construction. For those I haven't met, I'm actually an electrician by trade. I started my career way back when. I won't tell you how long ago, because then you'll start doing math and that's not okay. But you started my career apprentice through superintendent, came inside through all the estimating chairs, PM chairs, branch management, you know, division management, and then into the corporate management ranks. I've been with Maxim over a decade now. Crazy, I can't believe it's been that long. And it's my passion to bring excellence to organizations, and more specifically to people. You know, we think we're a construction industry. We're not. We're an industry that's fueled by people and their ability and their drive and their talent, and we want to be able to enable greatness as much as we possibly can. Maxim focuses on these four things: management consulting, meaning really coming in and making specific construction operations better, leaner, faster, cheaper, improve climate and culture, improve process definition, lots of different things there. Lean transformations obviously is a very big deal as we move away from the construction model and into a manufacturing model. Peer groups for owners or executives. We have many different trades of peer groups. They're trade specific, geographically disparate, meaning no competitors in the same groups. And revenue match, so you're with like-sized companies. And then we have a corporate finance piece. So enough about us and what we do. Let's jump into the us versus them. So as I just mentioned, I came from, you know, the labor side of the industry, and I understand what it is like to have kind of a barrier between the office and the field. And the issue becomes, you know, neither of the parties can be successful without one another, right? We evaluate a field leader's performance on productivity, and we evaluate a project manager or an operations team's performance on margin gain or fade or profit gain or fade, right? If you think about a project manager, if they weren't the estimator, you know, they really didn't have anything to do with bid day margin. However, we are relying on them to manage direct job costs, right? Labor, material, equipment, subs, other. That's great. But if those two entities are not really working together in lockstep and really communicating well, then you probably have experienced this yourself. That drop of information or that drop in collaboration can cause waste. And it's no one's fault, but really the solution is in process development. We'll get to that further on in the program. But what we want to do is get through this barrier. We have to get rid of that us versus them and turn it into us and them. And we'll talk about that a bit. When I think about really successful contractors and what they do that's different than others, is they do these four things and they do them really well. They hire the right people. And I just got done writing an article for CFMA. I think it comes out this month. Matter of fact, I think it's February, that talks about growing from within. I think you guys would agree, hiring, you know, mid-level management and up is very difficult these days because we have a serious challenge going on when it comes to talent availability. So that's going to be an issue. And that article is all about growing from within. So how do we hire the right people and then identify those folks within our organizations and grow them so that they're trainable and they have the right cultural commitment to the organization? How do we enrich that and make that happen? And that's what I mean by hire the right people. The second piece about culture. Do we have a company culture that encourages, not just encourages, but requires great communication, strong leadership, consistency in practices? Not 10 PMs do things 10 different ways or 10 estimators do things 10 different ways, right? Consistency in performance, because if we don't have consistency, it's very difficult to raise standards, right? If we don't have a standard, we can't raise it, right? If everyone's doing it their own way, it becomes very, very difficult to improve performance overall, where it becomes an enterprise level improvement. Financial aptitude is another thing that really concerns me greatly. And whether your challenge is in the field or the office or both, it doesn't make any difference. But those people have to understand how their own actions create an impact to the organization and to the financial health of both their project and the organization itself. That's that ownership piece, right? And every action that they take, how does that create an impact, whether positive or negative, to the output of that project? And then finally, it's the discipline piece. What is the best way for your organization to do things, whether it's RFIs, change orders, contract administration, whatever it happens to be? What is the one best way currently that we could be performing those functions, and then do we all do it that way? And I know that a lot of people are challenged by that, and that's why we're having this conversation. All of these things also do leverage themselves on communication and teamwork, and we're going to talk about that. But when I think about us versus them, there are causes, right? If we have a lack of trust or a lack of discipline, and when we're talking about us versus them, that void that exists between the field and the office, a lot of times we have a lack of one of these things on this slide. We have a lack of role definition. Who is supposed to do what? Sometimes when there's a lack of role definition, people get their feelings hurt because they think they're supposed to do that or whatever it happens to be. But if we had great role definition where people knew exactly what work came to them, what they do with it, and then where it goes, it gets rid of a lot of that conflict, right? And if we did a best practice where we did a workflow study and decided who should do what based on, the workflow of the organization, that kind of goes away. All that blurriness goes away, and the concept of people stepping on each other's toes really doesn't, it's no longer an issue. So any of these lack of causes something bad, confusion, impatience, anger, any of these things. So we have to make sure that we're breeding a culture that makes sure that we are not breaking trust. We are not lacking in discipline. We're not, just everybody does it their own way and we hope it comes out at the end okay. You guys will come to find really quickly that I really dislike the word hope in the construction organization. Well, we hope they do well. What are we doing to ensure that they do well? You notice I also listed on the lack of incentives. Incentive compensation, even small compensation, even small incentives become a very big deal when it comes to reinforcing positive behavior. And then training. I will tell you in my experience from operations, we were not great at training people. I don't know if there's anybody else on the line today that ever felt like they got kicked off the deep end of the pier when you got your last promotion, or you got a new set of software that you needed to learn and they were like, yeah, figure it out. That's not how we set people up to succeed either. So when I think about the us versus them, that engagement that has to exist between the field and the office, and I start digging into the root causes of those issues, this is what I see as some of those root cause issues. Sometimes we have ego involved. Maybe more than sometimes. I hate to say that out loud, but maybe more than we have a little issue with ego in construction sometimes, myself included. And I'm not excluding myself. I've made all these mistakes myself. So loyalty to one side, whether you're from the field, you're loyal to the field side, or the office, you're loyal to the office side. It shouldn't be that way. It should be us, right? We should be looking out for the best, best practices for the organization so that we can all be successful. Sometimes there's things like status and greed or control. We have a lot of control freaks in construction. I'm going to raise my hand and say myself included, right? So we've got to look at those root causes and then find out what we're going to do to rectify that. So let's talk about collaboration for a moment. When I think about enhancing the partnership between the field and the office, I think about collaboration, and I think about when we should get the field involved in discussions that would influence how they best do their work. Let me give you a really kind of comical example to this. If we were going to go buy this tool for the field and we just decided, hey, we looked at it and said, oh my gosh, there's 65 tools on this thing and maybe this would be great. I don't know how many tradespeople would want to carry this thing around, much less try to use it. So I use this as the example of collaboration gone wrong. If you look at this tool, it kind of looks good in theory. First of all, I wouldn't want to carry this thing around. But if I was actually going to buy a tool for our field folks to use, I would have to start asking the question, who should we consult, right? Who should we be having a conversation with before we go out and buy that tool or buy that, whatever that happens to be? what different input might they give us? And here's where it seems like it kind of falls off the tracks at times. Overcomplication does not necessarily equal success. As a matter of fact, I'd be willing to bet a lot of you on the line today feel the exact opposite. Overcomplication is absolutely bad when it comes to construction companies being successful, much less making sure that we're bridging that gap between the field and the office. So this is a strong example of collaboration gone wrong. I am very much, those of you who have met me or taken my courses before, I'm very much a bottom-up consultant. I like to talk to the people who do the work to find out what they need to do their work the best. And we bring some best case solutions to the table, and then we figure out what path is best for them based on their average job size, the markets that they service, the schedule constrictions that they're under with their specific customer set, all of those different factors. And we have a conversation about the work. So let's talk about the definition of success. Speaking of customers, let's talk about the definition of success for a few moments. We can't define success without finding out what the client wants. True statement. We can't define success until we find out what the client wants, because we can't deliver success to that client, which would ensure our future work, future profitability, lots of other things, without finding out what the client wants. Now, if there's any other gray hair on the call besides myself, and I am, of an older generation that's probably on this call, although you guys are getting in a good week, there's very little gray hair up there this week, but a couple weeks ago, that was not the case. But when I remember doing business development and doing things in my operational career, we used to tell our clients all the time, hey, you can have better, faster, cheaper, pick two, right? Better, faster, cheaper, pick two. You could get faster and cheaper, but it might not necessarily be better. Or you could get better and faster, but it wasn't going to be cheap. Well, what we see from our customers nowadays is that's completely changed. And you guys are feeling this from the operations side, I'm sure, where your customers are not only demanding two that you do extremely well, they're demanding all three of those things. So what does the client want is the starting point. Now, I want to reset your lens a little bit when it comes to clients. We have internal clients and we have external clients. And those internal clients, estimating, design, manufacturing, project ops, field operations, whoever, those are internal clients. And so what do those internal clients want? And we're talking about the gap between the field and the office today. And so we're going to ask the question here in a few moments, what does the field want? What does the office want? We also have external clients, obviously, right? The folks that we do work for. We do work for them, we get paid, hopefully. Cash flow is a whole nother session we can get into in another day, right? So we have these clients, and they, at any given time, have the option to choose whether or not they want to continue with us or not, right? They choose which path do they want to do business with us again, or do they not, right? And internal clients, don't they make that same choice? We all have a really big problem with turnover right now. We have a really big problem filling spots that are being opened by attrition. We're having really big challenges when it comes to recruitment, both in the field and in the office. So when we think about client management, we have to think about it as holistically, and we don't treat internal or external clients any differently, right? It should be a cultural approach to how we deal with people, right? How we manage and effectively communicate with people. So how do we drive that customer satisfaction, especially in this focus talking about the field? When we think about that relationship between the field and the office, the behaviors that we have to display are things that are based in trust and discipline and defined process, role definition, involvement, not dictatorship. Let me pause for a second. Not dictatorship, involvement. So should the field be involved in project development or project proposals or pre-construction planning? And when do we get them involved? Enough to make sure that they are engaged through the pre-construction process all the way through the exit strategy and lessons learned, which we'll talk about, right? How do we do that? When do we insert those field folks in? And I will tell you, it's going to be earlier than maybe you're currently doing. Incentives. How are we incentivizing people to make sure that we're driving the right behavior? If you're a self-performing subcontractor, which almost all of you are, how do you incentivize the right behavior in the field? What does that look like? Do we have gain share for the field where, You know, there's guardrails around it, but do they get rewarded for labor savings? Now, granted, you have guardrails like safety and they can't break and lose every tool you own to do that, but are they incentivized to be productive? And on the project management side, are they incentivized to have margin gain? Now, of course, there's guardrails there too. You can't upset the customer where they never want to come back and all these things. But are we incentivizing the right behavior, and are we training to that? But if we think about all those behaviors that have to happen, the results of those behaviors are well worth the investment of time. But very few construction companies think about it in a holistic manner this way. We all want operational excellence. We all want great culture. We want financial opportunity moving forward. But what are we doing to try to drive that? And I will tell you a lot of that, and this is why this entire session was written, a lot of those results that we want to have are based in that relationship and the workflow that exists between the office and the field. So let's talk about the field as the customer for just a second. What does the field want from operations? What do they truly want from operations? Now, again, I came from that side of the world. Lord knows I can't do it now. It's been a long time since I had a pair of clients in my hand, but what they want from operations is the right information, the right tools, the right material, right? Other things as well, I didn't want to get too verbose, but right crew size, right talent levels, lots of things, right? They want those things from the operations team, and they want it furnished when they need it, how they need it, where they need it. How do we do that? Well, we do that by having defined workflow processes in place so that we're not reinventing the wheel on every single job. And those processes are defined by the people who use the process, meaning both the field and the office. And I'll get to some examples here in just a moment. Great communication. Notice I didn't say average communication or absent communication or spotty communication. I said great communication. And there are processes you can put in place, which we'll discuss in a moment, that will drive that will make sure that that occurs. Effective structure, right? We all talk about structural integrity of construction organizations. What does that look like? I was just having this conversation with a group yesterday, as a matter of fact, in Florida, and we were talking about structure and what that means and the proper amount of support and what those things should look like. And then finally, strong leadership. Because if we don't have strong leadership at all levels of the organization, then really being able to drive all of those desired things for the field are not necessarily going to happen when and how they should. So let's jump into construction operations. Let's take a snapshot of how me as a consultant and Maxim, how we look at construction operations. And you'll see how complex these are. Now, I don't care if you're a $3 million a year contractor or you're a $300 million a year contractor. These are really the same pieces that we would look at. Obviously, larger organizations have additional divisions and geographic regions and all kinds of things. But when I think about construction operations, this is what we see. And we want to identify those opportunities that would drive synergy between the field and the office. So I know this is a bit of an eye test unless you're looking at a fairly big screen. But construction operations themselves are pretty complex. The top half of this wheel is all about what we call the strategic focus. It's all the strategy pieces, meaning who do we want to be? What markets do we want to serve? What customers within those markets? And how are we going to go compete, right? Do we have what we need to go compete in those markets? What makes us different? What are those competitive differentiators that we have that would allow us to be successful there? Then you have the structural piece. Right? Do we have the structure that will support now this new strategy of who we want to be and how much we want to grow? Then we have organizational leadership development, right? How do we develop people to be best in class so that they can best serve their teams, internal teams, as well as our clients externally? How do we do that? How do we develop people, which is a huge gap, I think, with a lot of companies. So how do we develop people really, really well? The bottom half of this wheel is all about the do work. Right? It's the organizational focus. It is work acquisition, meaning the get work function, estimating, business development, marketing, those types of things. And then we have work execution, right? It's the actual workflow of order to cash. Hey, we got a job through getting paid for retainage, right? That's the work execution piece. We have financial controls. That's all about budgeting and work breakdown structure and use of cost codes and change order management and all of those things. And then finally, we have technology. Because in my experience as a consultant, a lot of construction companies buy great technology tools and then they implement like 10% of what it can do. right? Instead of figuring out what they need for their organization and then making sure that they build the tool to support the types of work that they're going to do. So the reason I bring this up, and the reason this is even in this presentation, is because of the link of performance and collaboration that has to happen between the field and the office, because here are all the items in what we call our wheel that the field performs or uses or contributes to. Almost everything. Almost everything. Yet, when I think about the field's involvement in estimating, when I think about the field's involvement in financial controls or budgeting or work breakdown structure, it's usually a dictatorship where we're handing them something and saying, use that. Instead of talking with them, because we all know that the money is won or lost really a lot of times in field operations and project operations, right? So those things should be tracking together, but that's not necessarily the case. But when I started going through here and putting these little red dots on here when I wrote this program a few weeks ago, I was taken aback, even for me. I know how field operations and how integral they are to the overall health of the organization, but I didn't realize how many pieces of this will they actually touch until I did this. And so it's why I shared it with you all. So now that we understand how much the field can influence, right, and how big of an impact it could be if we do it correctly, let's talk about tools that would enable success. Let's talk about pre-job planning for a moment. Now, my last operational position was in pre-construction. Loved that world, loved solving problems before they became a problem, loved looking at best practices and trying to drive those best practices from design all the way through field execution. It was great. But let's talk about this for a second. When we think about pre-job planning and we think about, okay, we got a job, right? That's that first little spot. We got a project. You know, you celebrate, and then, you know, if you're an estimator like me, an old estimator like me, you go, we got low. How'd that happen, right? A little bit of buyer's remorse. Then we have processes in place to make sure that we're involving the right people in the right discussion early enough to be able to cut off a problem or spend the time looking for a best practice or things that could save us money or make us more money. Because guys, we're here to make money, right? We're not here to donate to the cause or do jobs for free. We're here to make money. So there should be processes involved, like an estimating turnover meeting that would get the entire project operations team together, including the estimator. Now we're talking construction size jobs, but getting the ops team together, including the field and the estimator, so that the estimator can teach us what they learned during the course of that bid. The estimator's got to read the specifications, they've got to read the bid forms, they've got to go sheet by sheet through the plans, and then they had to put basically a bid together, which is an estimating budget, right? Because they do a budget to do a bid. So we should allow them to teach all of us what that looked like. Now, the second step of this is, now that we learned all of that from the estimator, the operations team, which is field and office, should then put our heads together and go, okay, how are we actually going to build this job? Are we going to break it down differently the way the estimator saw it? Are we going to change any of the means and methods? Do we want to track it a little bit differently than the estimator wanted to? Or, right, those are the discussions. And the challenge I see that happens is we might not get the field involved in either one of those discussions. We wait until we get the job and we put the budget together and everything's done, and then we say, hey, Mr. Foreman, I'm going to have a job for you to run. Here you go. Here's your time card. Instead of having a discussion with them about, hey, you need to learn from the estimator what they learned also, then us as an operations team need to put our heads together to see how we're actually going to build it. And if there's any delta between how it was bid and how we're going to build it, then we as an operations team need to revise that budget via internal change order so that we can put the budget in alignment with how both the office and the field want to build the job. This is how we create collaboration. This is how we create cooperation. Not the dictatorship model, because I'm going to be honest, I've seen some budgets get handed to a field leader that weren't even close to how it was actually going to get built. And then what happens to the field leader? They're completely disenchanted. Like they're looking at going, that's not right. I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it another way. We didn't get them involved early enough. We didn't get them involved at all in that discussion. So workflow. Now this example, this is just sort of the, turnover meeting, the workflow handoff process, right? Of when we get a job. And I like workflow definition like this because it's easier. You'll notice on this slide, this doesn't have the foreman on here, but it's just an example of workflow, but it just follows chronologically, right? We get the bid files, the PM sets up the new project form, you know, the executive or accounting sets up the project number, and on and on and on it goes. And so let me get to this next slide. So then we have planning meetings where the foreman and purchasing and a bunch of other people are involved, right? We identify the action items. The project manager rides that list of action items like a pony till they're all done, right? Because we've got to get them done. This is pre-construction. Pre-construction is the time to solve where it maximizes our investment, right? So this handoff process is an example of, do we have defined processes within our organizations that guarantee that we're talking to the right people at the right time that would create the biggest impact to the overall health of that project or not? Let's talk about 3-week look-aheads for a moment also. 3-week look-aheads for those of you, I hope and pray that all of you guys on construction size jobs, not service special projects, but on construction size jobs, that you in the field are doing a 3-week look ahead. That tool is one of the most powerful tools that I have ever seen to drive communication between the field and the office. Yet, it's one of the most poorly deployed tools I've ever seen in our industry. And there's some reasons why, and I'll share those with you in just a moment. But 3-week look-aheads are put together so that the field can tell the rest of the operations team what they're doing and what their needs are. What are you planning on doing for the next 3 weeks, and what do you need from the rest of the operations team in order to be successful with that planned work? Now, I hear an awful lot, well, I don't do a 3-week look-ahead because the plan gets changed all the time. Yeah, we got to have a conversation about that as well, and we will. Have you guys ever seen, and I am an old foreman myself, and I am guilty of this, someone working in a whack-a-mole capacity, right? A fire pops up over here. I don't care if you're a PM or a field leader, makes no difference. An emergency pops up over here, so you go over there and whack that thing down. And then in the meantime, another fire pops up over here, so you run over here and whack that thing down also. That is a really, really difficult, that was a cleaned up version of what I was thinking, a very difficult place to live day to day. It's a very reactive place to live. Now, we're never going to get rid of all the emergencies that pop up, but we have to control as much as we possibly can and plan as much as we possibly can within the walls of our organizations, meaning the field and the office. What I hear when I talk to foremen about 3-week look-aheads, that for folks that don't do it well, I hear, I don't have time. Well, they don't have time because they're running a fire drill all day long every day because they don't plan. Or they tell me, which is heartbreaking to me, I don't see the value. And I hear from them, well, Steph, I used to do them, but nobody ever talked about them. Nobody ever called me about it. So I stopped doing it, or I just did a pencil whip to keep somebody off my butt because I didn't do it. Either of those things is making sure that that process is going to be underutilized and you can't leverage it to drive the level of collaboration that we know that we need to have between those parties. So let's take a look at an example of a short interval plan. So in this plan, and again, it's a plan. We know things change on a job, but we're going to get to that as well. We still have to plan what we can control, right? We have to plan what we can control. So in this example, there are several different activities that this contractor is going to be working on. And this is week 1, and there's a little roller to go to week 2 and 3. And basically what they're saying is, hey, if you look at the third one down, it says wall roughing. And if you scroll over to the right, you'll see that Monday through Friday, because this is a job that's set up for 5/8, they're going to have 2 people working on that all week. Okay, great. 2 people working on that all week. That's fantastic, right? That gives us a heads up about how many people are going to be on this job. The second thing that happens is, if you notice, there is a column called material, and underneath materials, it's right in the middle of the screen, it says materials, and it says source and status, right? So in other words, the field leader is telling me, where is that material coming from? That's the source, right? Is it coming from a fab shop? It's coming from a vendor. Where is it coming from? And it's just a pull down menu. And then the status is, hey, it's been delivered, meaning the D, you see the D in the status column, delivered, meaning they have it, right? It's been delivered, it's all good. R means requisitioned. Okay, So let's take a pause for a second. Let's look at that wall rough-in item. You notice this person has a crew of 2 starting on this on Monday. But he's saying the material's coming from the vendor, it's been requisitioned, meaning he didn't have it yet. So if I'm a project manager or superintendent, depending on who plays this role in your organization, what do you think I'm going to ask about? What do you think I'm going to try to solve? I'm going to go try to find out where that material is. And if it isn't available, I'm going to go try to source it somewhere else, because I know this person has a plan to put 2 people on this activity starting Monday. So if you scroll down this, you'll also notice that there's one that says flange linear lighting. It's fine. The material is coming from the vendor, and the code under status is B, back ordered. Holy cow, that's a problem, right? If you're going to start working on this on Monday, but the lighting you want to install is back ordered. The whole idea behind a short interval plan is the field sharing with us what their plan is, based usually on the GC schedule, right, of what we're supposed to be working on. This is also a document of what we planned on working on that we could share. Now, we don't want to share productivity information with them either. What's interesting about this SIP, this short interval plan also, is if you look on the far right-hand side, there's also a productivity target, right? Because when we estimate work, we use hours per square feet, hours per linear foot, whatever it happens to be, hours each, whatever, to estimate work. Your budget should have both hours and quantities in them. So for instance, if you look at that wall rough-in item, our productivity rate right in the middle of the screen is 11.2 linear feet per hour. Now, if I know that's the productivity rate that's in our budget, and I know this person's gonna have 2 people working on that all week, then by math, I can say, hey, by the way, you need to get, what does that say, 900 plus feet installed with those 2 people that week. It's a quantifiable production target. This is 100% transparency. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with 100% transparency, but I will tell you, if you look at the next generation of construction worker coming in, both in the office and the field, they're used to something that I was not raised with, and that is instant access to data and information. This is what we're giving them. Here's your plan. Here's how many hours you're planning on working on that thing. And if you spend 2 guys or 2 people all week on that activity, you've got to get 900 plus feet of that conduit installed. 100% transparency on performance, right? We're telling them what they need to get done. Now, we do overbid and underbid things, right? Which is a whole nother reason why we need to have some other things done, which I'll talk about in a moment, which is time and quantity reporting. Also in short interval plans, we should have, alternate work plans, meaning what's our work plan if plan A gets blown up, because that happens often. And do we have the tools, information, material to do that? There's also a tools column in the short interval plan. You'll see this right in the middle. It says tools and equipment. Yes or no, you have the tools and equipment to do each one of those activities. If my field does this and I see a no, what do you think I'm going to try to solve for them? I'm going to go try to find out what equipment or tools they need and make sure they get it when they need it. Because my job as a PM, again, or a super, depending on how your workflow happens in your companies, my job is to remove any obstacles that exist between my field and getting their production done. The short interval plan is their ability to tell me what they need so that I can react to it 3 weeks ahead of time. 3 weeks ahead of time. Keep in mind, if you're doing a 3-week look ahead and you start the job, right, very beginning of the job, week 1, yeah, you're gonna have to do all 3 of those weeks, right? But come week 2, really you're just moving, right? Week 2 and week 3 slide to week 1 and week 2. You might have to tweak them a little bit, but you're really only adding 1 more full week, and you're adding it 3 weeks ahead of time. I can solve a lot of stuff 3 weeks ahead of time for my field. I can solve very little when I get a phone call today that they need something by 7 a.m. tomorrow. Is a very powerful tool of communication. And it shouldn't be yeah, this job should use those. This should be standard practice for almost everyone. So let's talk about the impact. If I had someone in your organization track the calls that came into the shop looking for tools, material, that type of thing, and I had them kind of track this. If the request gave less than 2 days notice, 2 working days notice, it would be classified as unplanned. If they gave more than 2 working days notice for that request, it's called planned, right? That gives us more time to react, even if we just use this as a baseline. As a consultant, what I normally see is 70% of those calls that come into job, service aside, just construction jobs, service aside, 70% of those calls are giving less than 2 working days notice to react to that request. Only 30% of them are 2 days or more. That means 70% of the time we are leveraging our success on the hope that our vendor or our fab shop or our tool guy has exactly what we need sitting on a shelf waiting for us to ask for it and the resources to bring it to us. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think my vendors are stocking enough for me to use that hope as a strategy anymore. We all know that material procurement is a mess right now. So if you just did the short interval plan well, just this one tool alone, what would happen? Well, we're consultants and we measure everything, right? What we see happen when just the 3-week look at is done well is these percentages switch. They flip. How different would your construction departments be operationally, financially, culturally, if 70% of the time we had everything the field needed sitting right in front of them ready to go? And only 30% of the time were we hitting that emergency button of, hey, I need this in 2 days or less. Be very different. Very, very different. So if you're going to have a process, you need to have a process map of what gets done and when. If we don't have it mapped out, it can't be taught to effectively, and it certainly can't be measured if it's being followed. This is an example of a workflow for the short interval planning process. The foreman or the superintendent enters their 3-week look ahead by Wednesday at noon. You'll notice in the top is metrics, right? Wednesday at noon, the foreman or the superintendent does the short interval plan. By Thursday at 4 p.m., the project manager has to review it first, and then have a conversation, meaning a verbal conversation, right? Pick up the phone, have a conversation about the plan to make sure that we identify those things that are missing so that we get commitment from each other to get those things solved. Why? Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we're executing work in the field effectively. The foreman then can set their crew size based on the plan. They report time and quantity, right? All these kinds of great things happen. And then we get production reports, which I'll share with you in a moment. Great way to drive to collaboration. So let's move forward. How about time reporting? Now, time reporting must be accurate. So I can't be the only person, and I did this when I was in the field. I can't be the only person who's seen a time report come in from the field that's utter fabrication. In other words, it's just a pencil whip exercise to make sure everybody gets paid 8 that day. Time reporting has to be accurate. It is critical data for both estimating and for claims management, which I'll show you here in just a moment, right? Time reporting must be accurate. Not the hide the peanut program because the field leader's afraid they're going to get their butt shot off if a cost code runs over. If we're creating that culture, if we have that culture going on, then you're basically teaching folks to lie to you, and that's a problem. Quantity reporting is the next step, right? This is all about sharing information between the field and the office. So quantity reporting also has to be accurate, whether you're actually reporting quantities. You know, some of the subs on the line, sheetrock is always quantities, framing is always quantities, right? And you guys do quantity reporting daily, not weekly. Electricals, mechanicals, a lot of times we do quantity reporting weekly, right? Because we're there for such a long duration on the jobs. Or you can use percent complete, it's better than nothing. But any of those things would allow you to have data that would tell you how we're doing, and I'll show you this in just a moment. Also, we should take a look at the work that we performed, that we identified that we were going to do on the short interval plan versus what we actually worked on. And if you notice on this example, there's a few of the items, the descriptions that were worked on, the cost codes that were worked on that are italicized. The lighting, the feed wire, and the wall devices and trim. You notice those are italicized. And what that's telling me, there's an exception report running back here that's saying, hey, heads up, field foreman and project manager, we worked on 3 cost codes that weren't anywhere on our short interval plan, right? Meaning we're performing unplanned work. Well, you all know how productive is unplanned work. It's not nearly as productive as things we planned on working on. So if we have a 3-week look ahead and we have time and quantity reporting that's accurate, then we can have production data that we can share between the office and the field. And if you notice, there's a few examples on here that are red. Now, I'm too dumb for hard. Let's make things simple. Turn things green, turn those cost codes green that we're ahead and red that we're behind. So said differently, you'll notice on the lighting item, that one that's second from the bottom, P1 lighting, we have spent 90 hours out of the 277 hours, but we should have only spent 55 hours. So you notice that's red. So as of right now, you know, we're behind on that item. We're pretty significantly behind. We're going to lose on that item. So here's my concern about that. Do we have this kind of data early enough for our field to be able to say, hey, we got a problem, where they can actually interfere and try to mitigate that loss? Or, you know, if this is on us because we didn't plan it well, we didn't deliver the material when it was needed, whatever, we can solve that because we can see it happening. We can see it happening early. But if we don't do any kind of productivity tracking like this, when are we going to find out a cost code's going to run over? When it's over? So that's if it's an internal source of loss of productivity, we would want to be able to see it so we could solve it. But what if it was an external source? Said differently, is your productivity ever hurt by somebody outside of your walls? Another trade's in your way, didn't get done, they left a bunch of garbage in the way and you can't get into the room to work, whatever happens, right? We would want production information to be able to articulate and quantify the loss of productivity that we experienced. Right, so for this given payroll week, we spent 296 hours. That's on the actual column that comes straight off of payroll, but we should have only spent 196.8 hours, because we know that, because we have both accurate time reporting and quantity reporting. Now, for those of us who've gone down the path of claim and litigation and arbitration and all those crazy things, we know how critical data is, right? It is the difference between winning or losing. Right? The person with the most data that shows up that's real wins. We know this, right? And how important is this for a field leader? Now, I don't necessarily love handing a field leader a report like this that's table full of numbers. Now, some of them are fine with it, but let me show you an example of a productivity report that would be generated that the field and the PM would see. And this is an example. This is a job that has how many cost codes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cost codes, right? This job has 9 cost codes. And maybe there's multiple areas of this. You would have multiple reports just like this. But you'll notice that these, each one of these cost codes has a budget, right? And it has used hours. So the budget column is blue. The used is red. That comes straight off of time reporting, right? Earned is how many hours we should have used. Right? That is basically a calculation from our quantity reporting. How many hours did we use versus how many we should have used? And then the forecast is purple, right? Given this current production rate, how many hours are we going to spend when this thing's done? Given the current production rate of what we're experiencing in the field. Now, if this is, you know, your job and you have these 9 cost codes and you're a field leader or a PM and you're looking at the graph on the bottom, all these cute little colored bars on the bottom. Here's the learning curve. Red bar bigger than green bar bad, green bar bigger than red bar good. Meaning you want your earned hours, in other words, hours you should have spent, to be more than what you actually spent, right? Because red bar is how many you actually spent. So if you're a field leader or a PM and you translate all that data from all of these tables into something like this, how quickly can you scan this data on a weekly basis to find out how your cost codes are doing? It's pretty fast, isn't it? Instead of reading tables full of black and white numbers. So if we have data, I'd also encourage you to make sure it's in a format that's user-friendly to the parties that need to use it. Because let's be honest, if you hand the field productivity reports that are in black and white numbers, are they going to use them or not? If you handed them this, where they can just scan across and they can pick the few cost codes that are really coming off the tracks and they're coming off early, and that's where they go focus their attention. Now you gave them a tool, not just a report. It's a tool. It's different. And all it was is a translation of data into something that's more user-friendly for them. All right. I think there's somebody out there that's not muted because I can hear some background noise. I don't want to mute y'all if I can keep from it.
I think I got it, Stephanie.
Okay, awesome. All right. All right, so let's talk about a daily project report. Another great tool of communication between the field and the office, and I get the same answer with field foremen who don't do this well. Well, nobody ever, looked at it or talked about it, so I just stopped doing it. Folks, the daily project report is the first-hand account of what actually happened to us on the job site, right? This is the field telling us what happened to them, right? So we have weather and we have all these things, but we also have that section called delays, right? And a lot of software nowadays will allow you to attach photos to specific sections of the daily project report, which I think is fantastic, right? So weather, you had really cruddy weather outside, you take pictures of the snow all over everything or ice all over everything, and you attach it to the weather section. Same thing with delays. So this is our ability for the field to communicate to us, hey, heads up, we got a problem. Right, we weren't able to go into building A floor 1 and do the wall rough because the framing wasn't done, or whatever the reason may be. Right, and best in class folks will use not just the delay section, but the additional comments or blank text section to tell us when there's something coming up in the near future that looks like it might be a problem. That's proactively managing your customer, right? Your GC or your owner. Hey guys, we're scheduled to hang fixtures in the gymnasium in 2 weeks, but it does not look like that's going to be done in time. Wouldn't that be a great communication between the field and the office and the customer going, hey, we might have a problem? Because I will tell you now, I'd rather you guys solve problems before it gets to the delay section, because how effective is your change order management right now? Change orders are a big fight. So I would prefer you stay out of that fight and manage it proactively first, not reactively after. Just an idea to consider. All right. So we talked about short interval planning, time reporting, quantity reporting, daily project reports, production reports. Those should all be processes, not we hope we hire PMs that know how to do this, not we hope we have field leaders that know how to do this. Process. Everybody does it the same way. That is teachable. That's transparent. Not hope. Hope is not teachable. Hope is not transparent. So things like, this is an example of an exit strategy. This is another great communication tool that really connects the field and the office. Is when we hit 80% build on a big construction job, maybe we should hit the timeout. And we should have a conversation about how to manage the exit of the job. Have you guys ever experienced fade at the end of the job? Or we've got too many loose ends and we didn't keep track of them? Or, because if you think about closing a job out, there's a whole list of things that have to be done from the office perspective, and there's a whole list of things from the field perspective that need to be done. Shouldn't we hit the timeout button and have a process by which we manage the exit of the job? And just as an aside, does the customer remember the beginning, the middle, or the end of the job? They remember the end. And you need to look like a rock star at the end of that job, in addition to salvaging that profit on the job. And by the way, the perception of profitability from the field side and the office is very different, right? And we know conflict arises when there's a difference between expectation and reality, right? When I ask field folks how much profit companies make, construction companies make, you'd be floored at the answers I get. Steph, they got to be knocking down 30, 40 points or they wouldn't be doing this. Those of us in the trade know averages, it varies by trade, but in my industry, electrical and sometimes mechanical, 3.5% to 4.5% net profit before tax. There's not a lot to lose. That line between profitability and loss is very, very small, right? That's an issue. But having a process that drives conversation, that drives collaboration, that identifies work so that we can work the plan, right? Those are the types of processes we want to make sure that we are forcing the right levels of communication between the parties on the operations team. The exact same thing with lessons learned, right? What do we want to learn at the end of a job? And shouldn't that be a process? And shouldn't it be documented and then shared with the rest of the organization? Say we built a hospital and we learned a lot of things, good, bad, and otherwise on that job. That operations team should come together and learn what happened on that job and create all of this knowledge about closing that job and what happened. So the operations team, how about things like, hey, Mr. Estimator, I had to fix a bunch of things and move things around because you didn't take it off the way we built it. We don't have a lessons learned, and we didn't do all those changes by internal change order so we could see them a year or two from now. All that knowledge is lost, and the opportunity to make those same mistakes again exists, or we can't have that. Lessons learned is the opportunity for the ops team to learn what happened on that job and document it, and then we can share it with the rest of the organization. What a powerful platform, not done very often in our business. So everything I talked about these processes that really force the right conversations with people between the office and the field are good. Don't get me wrong. They're very, very good and 100% necessary to be able to drive the culture and the operations the way that we want them, that drives financial success, right? We all want financial stability. We all want financial success. Those are driven by process, not hope. They're driven by process, not luck. And they're not that difficult to do. You just have to hit the pause button a little bit and work on them. So those are good, but this is even better. Making this happen, I want you to start thinking about the field as the consumer of a product, right? They're the consumer of the product, right? If you think about estimating, design, fabrication, kitting, logistics, all of those things, depending on your trade, but all of those things happen. And then the field is the user of that product, right? Tools, information, material. They're the user of that product. If they're the user of the product, shouldn't they have some input as to the upstream activities that produce that product? Said differently, have you ever had prefab or kitted material hit the job site that they didn't want to use? And then you have the refab going on. Or we're going to fix what they sent to us. Well, any savings opportunities we had then are now thrown out the window because we're probably using things that the field doesn't like, or they don't understand how we came up with it. So let me give you a best case scenario. Imagine this, and it isn't just a dream, I promise you. This is what we all strive for. This is what consultants bust their backsides to make happen for people. Yourself, you can do this. You just have to dedicate the time and attention to this. Imagine that every job title involved in project operations was involved in defining and implementing standards for the following. Product standards, meaning down to the catalog number, by vertical market, product standards, assembly standards, design standards, manufacturing or prefab standards, kitting standards, field installation standards, and all of that is tied into estimating standards. Can you imagine how different the workflow would be if all of those things were in alignment with very little translation needed between each one of these pieces of the silo inside of your organization? That's what we're looking for. Remember, the customer wants better, faster, cheaper. This is how we give it to them. And the plus is that void between the field and the office gets smaller and smaller because we're involving the right people in these discussions. We talk about product standards and assembly standards. Shouldn't we have field people in the room? And those product standards and assembly standards, once we get those knocked down and we start talking about design standards, wouldn't that also involve the field to talk about the normal means and methods of how we want to install our work so it can be incorporated in the design standards within our organizations? The design standards would then lend itself to the discussion of manufacturing standards. How do we fab that, right? We put best practices there. Manufacturing standards would then lend itself to kitting standards. How are we going to put that stuff in a kit, and how do we ship it out effectively to the field where they need it, how they need it, with the mobility that they need in the field. Field installation standards, so not every job is up to every foreman every time to define how they're going to do stuff. What are our field installation standards? And then finally, all of those things should be incorporated into our estimating standards, so there's very little translation from the time we get a job until we put it into operations and start getting it through design, kitting, fab, all of those things, and into field operations. It is not just a dream. This is what we call a lean organization, right? And I hesitate to use that word because it's so overused. Guys, I did that in an hour. I did it 4 hours yesterday, but I guess I was a lot more verbose yesterday when I did this. As always, I know we're about to run out of time, but if you have any questions, if you would like to have a conversation or schedule some time with me, I'm never going to send you a bill for a 15-minute conversation. If I can help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. But I hope you think about incorporating workflow definition in your organizations so that you're driving and requiring that conversation to take place so that the gap between the field and the office becomes smaller, and all of the things that fall through the cracks that ultimately cost us time and money and produce poor culture or lack of trust and all those other things, those all go away. So I hope you consider doing a few of these things, and I hope it was a little bit of a helpful discussion for you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for your presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. As Stephanie said, she's got her email address on here, so reach out to her if you have any questions, and we look forward to everyone joining us on our next ASA webinar. Thank you all again.
Thank you. Hey, Mark, I am in Texas. Maxim is in Colorado, but yes.
Okay, bye-bye.